Welcome to another interview session with Reset Revolution. My name is Kotoha Kudo, and I'm one of the founding members of the organization, and welcome to our interview session. Today, we will be joined by Sarah Murawsky from the International School of Brussels, and we will be talking about education for girls in India. So a little bit about who we are as Reset Revolution. We are a group of high school students who are determined to shed light and awareness on social justice issues, including feminism, and specifically today we will be talking about education for girls in India. I'm just going to wait until Sarah comes here. But a little bit about Sarah Murawsky herself. She lived in India, and her family is connected to the Nanhi Kali Foundation. If I'm not wrong, she will give you a more of in-depth explanation as to how they're related to one another. But she is very knowledgeable in this area. So please look forward to what we will be talking about. Let me just wait until Sarah comes here. There she is. Okay. So if you would like to continue with staying updated and notified about our interviews as well as what we do, feel free to follow us on Instagram right here, and you can check out the record this on our IGTV later or on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go check that out. There we go.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Yes. Do you want to go ahead and give a simple introduction of who you are and what we'll be talking about?
Yes. So my name is Sarah Murawsky. I'm currently a senior at the International School of Brussels. But prior to being in Belgium, I lived in India for 2 years, and I lived in the city of Hyderabad, which is like south central of India, and I went to the International School of Hyderabad there. The topic that I want to be discussing about is obviously access to education in India and gender inequality. And so how I relate to that is actually my mom works for this organization, which I'll be talking about later. So this non-governmental organization that is kind of using education as well as sports to promote gender equity. And so my relation to the topic, actually, I took interest in it kind of the last year I was in India, and then my senior year, because this was my topic for my extended essay. So I was super interested to see how an organization can be using sports and also education to promote gender equity in India. So that was my relation to the topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so throughout this interview, we'll also be talking about her personal experiences living in India and talking about things that she's heard from her Indian friends. So, yeah.
I also have a preface really quickly. I have no intentions of being judgmental to Indian culture. Like Kotoha said, this is my perspective from living in India. The culture and the country itself is such a beautiful country and was truly one of the best experiences of my life. But I have no intentions of being judgmental or offensive to it. It's just kind of expressing challenges of gender inequality, which are expressed in any other country, but specifically to India will be my focus. But I, again, no intention of being judgmental or offensive. So I definitely want to put that out.
Okay, perfect. So before we actually go into the actual topic, could you give us a brief rundown of what the situation is currently like for girls and education in India right now?
Yes. So it's a really complex topic regarding education for girls because there's kind of two phases. So one would be access, and then the second one, which is more challenging, would be sustaining and maintaining their education. So girls in India, I feel like there's kind of this misconception with like impoverished countries where they think that, oh, like these poor communities don't always have access to an education, which isn't necessarily true. In India, there was this law passed called the RTE law, which is Right to Education Act in 2009, which made compulsory education for kids between 6 to 14 years old. So these girls in these poor communities do have access to education. The issue is that the education they're receiving is a state education, so it's a weaker system and a weaker education to what they're receiving. And the issue that's more predominant is actually them maintaining or sustaining this education. And so I actually have this report done by the organization. It's called the TAG report. I know it's inverted because of the video, but it's a TAG report, the Teenage Girls Report, and it emphasizes my point about maintaining their education, because here this is education status of girls from 13 to 19 years old. So what we can see here, you can visibly see it's a larger pencil, but 92.3% of girls at 13 years old are attending schools, but what we see is this kind of decrease from 13 years old down to 19. So there are various aspects to this, and I think one of the biggest contributors to this challenge of sustaining and maintaining education is that Indian society is a predominantly male society, like many other ones. So it's a predominantly male society, and boys and men are often valorized and prioritized over women. On top of that, we have the common stereotype, which we all are familiar with, and the idea that women belong in the household and complete household chores and all this stuff. So it kind of poses this challenge, and this male dominance is completely reflected in the education system. So like I said, with maintaining education, there's a lot of challenges because of this stereotype and because of this male dominance within the society that definitely challenges female education.
So you said you talked about male dominance. More specifically, how do you think it's accentuated within society?
I think the best example that I can give about this like male dominance accentuation within the Indian society is in COVID. COVID has hugely impacted young girls in India right now within this pandemic. And a great example would be online schooling. As we all know, we've gone through Zoom. It wasn't a great experience, but a lot of kids in India had to go through the same situation. But in these underprivileged and low economic status communities, they don't always have access to 3 computers for 3 kids or 2 computers for 2 kids. They only usually have 1 or none. I don't know. But in the case that they do have 1 and there's a boy and a girl in the family, the boy always gets priority. So the girls unfortunately are falling severely behind in their schooling because they're not getting the opportunity to continue with that, and the boys are prioritized and valorized, and their education is given more importance. On top of that, there has actually been a kind of rise and insurgence of child marriages. So again, this male dominance and kind of objectifying and making females internalize this like stereotype of being in the household chores. So child marriages is a great example. And in the pandemic, there has been a huge increase in child marriages. And this is because the families can't necessarily support all their kids. So by marrying off their child, one, if they marry them off at a younger age, it's less of a dowry for them to be concerned about. So the dowry is this payment along with the bride to the groom's family. So it's less of a dowry for them to be concerned about, but also it's one less mouth to be concerned about within this pandemic. So yeah, I think COVID is a huge issue.
That's really interesting because I never really thought about how COVID plays a role in all of this.
Yeah, and I think I took for granted my education, and you take for granted this whole idea of being on Zoom. Zoom sucks, but for a lot of girls in India, they don't even have access to this Zoom education, and they fall immediately behind. So it's very difficult for them.
Yeah. On the topic of child marriages, I'm guessing that that's one factor that contributes to why girls are taken away from school so early. Are there any other aspects that contribute to this?
Yes, totally. I like that you said aspects, because there's obviously never one cause for reasons of girls dropping out. But there's I could give like 3 main divisions. So like you had said, we have child marriages, which are huge. On top of that, like I repeatedly have said, this stereotype of women being marginalized to household chores. But the biggest one, I think, is the menstrual cycle. So in India, girls are not often provided with hygienic facilities at school. So the state education that they're in, they don't necessarily have like a very hygienic space to change their pad, to change their underwear. And obviously we all know as girls, we get very self-conscious about our bodies on the period. We are concerned with bleeding through. We are concerned with just embarrassment of this whole situation. And honestly, it takes a hit at our dignity. I just feel completely out of spot personally with that. So I can completely relate to this situation. So a lot of girls, through this embarrassment and concern about their period, they leave school. And also, it's kind of accentuated in Indian culture where the period is considered impure. It relates to this whole religious, huge idea about impurity. And so adding a taboo, and on top of this embarrassment of, you know, you can't control what your process, and it's a totally natural process for these girls, but because it's such a huge taboo and considered impure, there's this complete embarrassment and kind of hit at their dignity when attending these schools, so they leave. And later I'll talk about how this organization is helping with this, because that is a huge issue. On top of that, the marginalization of women to household chores is huge. Like, these girls, especially in underprivileged families, when the two parents have to leave and financially provide, the girl is taken out of school to clean the house, to cook, to do anything regarding household responsibilities to maintain it. And so they're automatically taken out. And again, child marriages, they are sold off at a very young age for the family not to be concerned with the dowry, and especially during this pandemic, like I said. So a lot of factors, external factors, that contribute to them dropping out.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe describe a personal experience or different personal experience that connects to your three causes that you just talked about?
Yes. So I have one of my best friends in India. I remember her, like, on my last year being there. She had told me this story, and it completely relates to the idea of the menstrual cycle. So like I mentioned, the menstrual cycle in India is a taboo, and it is considered impure in their culture. And so when she had gone to her grandparents' house, before touching or doing anything within the house, she had to take a shower, a full shower, head to toe down, just complete wash down, before she was able to really interact with them or touch anything in the house. And I was completely, like, shocked by that. To have and obviously their intentions, they had no bad intentions with doing this, but it's just this kind of internalized taboo towards the menstrual cycle where they consider it impure. And I think it kind of adds this, like, degrading, and not embarrassing, but degrading idea towards a completely natural process. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the menstrual cycle, yeah, that was huge. But moving more towards, like, the educational aspect and sports, we actually, in my school, there was this kind of CAS experience where you would play sports or teach kids from an orphanage. And so these kids would come after school once a week, I think, and some of them would divide into groups. So some would be taken by the seniors in my grade to either be taught English or science or math. And this wasn't particular to boys or girls, but they were both given just a boost in their education, because this state education that they're given is definitely very weak. But I think the best story for me to tell was when I was playing sports with these girls. It was really amazing to be able to kind of watch these girls and help teach them to play something that they had never seen or played before in their entire life. So it was great to give them this possibility to learn and to have a new experience with playing sports. So that was definitely a big interaction with the idea of this gender inequality between boys and girls, especially in sports. So yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, I know you like to play sports. You play a lot of sports. And I know you grew up playing sports as well. So how do you think sports relates to this idea of female empowerment? How do you make, like, for people, literally these girls that have never played sports before, how do you think what did they learn out of just playing a sport that we actually take for granted?
Yeah, I think some people who know me, my attitude in school and on the court is, like, paradoxical. I'm a quiet person in school, but on the court, I just feel so empowered, and I love the community and the environment that I'm in. And so for me, it was kind of like, I guess, an obvious reason why these girls should be playing sports, because it is such an psychologically empowering activity. And also it's huge. Like, the big reason for it is because it's so underrepresented in India. So I think these girls, there are definitely amazing Indian female athletes, but they're so underrepresented. So for these girls growing up without being physically active or learning about sports, it can take a toll on your psychological mentality. And I think by playing sports and by encouraging them to play sports, it is empowering them and helping them gain more confidence, like it helped me as well. And so, yeah, I think it's a great way to encourage them to also valorize themselves, like this underrepresentation makes them internalize the fact that, oh, maybe I can't be playing sports. I go out in a car in India and all you see around you are boys playing cricket, and you actually never see girls playing any sports outside. So I think valorizing them and teaching them that you can do the same activities as these boys in India is a huge like tool to promote this gender equity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I also want to move towards the topic of the Nanhi Kali Foundation, but could you maybe explain what it is, what they do, and how they relate to the project itself?
Yes. So the Nanhi Kali Foundation is it's kind of this division that's part of this whole mother organization, if you want to call it. So this mother organization is the Nandi organization. They have 3 kind of streams to it. And so it all contributes to this goal of eradicating poverty. But these 3 streams are agricultural stream, upper education. But the one that I'm focusing on, the Nanhi Kali Foundation, is focusing on young girls. So the Nanhi Kali Foundation, the 2 ways in which they're supporting and valorizing young girls is, one, through education, and also through sports, which is a new addition. But for this education, they aim to ensure that young girls get a minimum of 10 years of education, because commonly these girls do drop out either in between those 10 years or after. But their goal is, by valorizing and demonstrating girls the importance of an education, their hopes and their goal is to hopefully encourage them to carry through this education even after the 10 years. So they provide these girls weekly, every day within the Monday through Friday, they provide them with after-school tuition. So right after school, they're sent with a woman from the Nanhi Kali Foundation who tutors them in math and sciences and English, to just, allow them to notice the importance of this education, especially for occupational opportunities. And actually, a statistic that I'd read was that girls who were uneducated in India were 6 times more likely to be married off than girls who had completed a minimum 10 years of schooling. So that just goes to show the importance of this schooling that they're trying to do. Apart from the educational aspect with the schooling, there's also the hygienic education, especially regarding the period and the menstrual cycle. So these girls, like I mentioned, the menstrual cycle is such a huge factor in their dropout rates, but this organization actually provides them with dignity kits. And in this dignity kit, apart from the hygienic materials such as pads or clean underwear, so they're able to have hygienic methods during their period, they're also given shoes and books and supplies that maybe their family could not afford to have given them. And so it's this whole idea, again, of emphasizing the importance of school and hygienic practices when they're on their period, to kind of reinforce this idea of dignity. The whole kit is a dignity kit. You want these girls to feel valorized and important and prioritized, and also able to go to school with this kit and not kind of drop out of it. But yeah, and then my favorite part and why I love it so much is this addition of sports and using sports to promote gender equity. So they have these kind of big tournaments where they gather girls from a bunch of different districts within India to just come and play sports. And they have athletics and track and field, and they actually introduce football, so a team sport for them to be practicing, and just encouraging them to be valorized and be prioritized and physically active, it's yeah.
Yeah, I just received a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
I saw them. So, oh yeah. Also, if you have any questions throughout the live, feel free to just type it in, either just throughout the chat or like through the question box. But going back to how girls are taken out of school because of household work and how they have to support the family, or they are married off, which is a lot of the reasons I think are cultural, but also very much
Yes.
financial. So do you think that this idea of taking girls out of education to support their families can also be applied to different countries, but how would they
Ooh.
differ to India just
Ooh.
overall?
That's a really good question. Um, Oh, that's really great. I think my focus was definitely the Hindu community within India, and they're like these underprivileged communities. But I think it would be really interesting to look at other countries. I'm sure India is definitely not one of the only developing countries in the world. So I definitely assume that in this pandemic, especially, there could be this like prioritization of males in their education, which I think is really cool. But I think in India, what differs is this really strong internalization of their culture, and especially this idea of kind of, like I mentioned, impurity with the menstrual cycle. But again, like I mentioned, being like a woman in India in their kind of society and this internalized culture is already very challenging. Like I think I've never really seen a culture that compares with their kind of internalized values and stuff. And also, I think one huge thing in Indian society is that women on their period aren't able to enter temples and are not able to don't usually go to work on their period. So again, this huge emphasis on kind of marginalizing women to household chores, but also marginalizing them to the extent where they aren't able to worship or practice things the same thing as men on their period. I don't know. It's a very complex question, but I think there's definitely this differentiation between India and a lot of other cultures. But in terms of education, I'm sure there are many challenges posed on young girls to continue their education for sure.
In the case of, because you were talking about earlier of how a lot, well, obviously the whole topic is basically how girls are taken out of education. How has this reflected on the society of India? What were the repercussions?
Ooh. Repercussions. I don't know. I think it's very hard to generalize this because it's obviously from my perspective of being in there. And I think, okay, like from what I've done in research, I think this idea of pulling out girls from school completely limits their occupational opportunities. So a lot of them are then restricted, like I said, to these household chores or agricultural areas and farming and stuff like that. And definitely low economic occupational opportunities. So I think that's a huge repercussion of it. Also, again, girls who are uneducated or not educated to the same extent as other girls are married off very early. So I think the repercussion is kind of limiting their lives, like they're limiting their social life and their occupational life, like I think but the thing is in India, it is progressing. We can't deny this. Like it is it's a large country and they are progressing with literacy rates and educational rates, and also female entrepreneurs. But I think a huge thing with these underprivileged communities and repercussions are limiting completely their social life and their occupational opportunities. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think I was reading something yesterday, like an article of India, and it was basically talking about the work, the labor, what is it? The labor, gender labors. What do you call it again?
I don't know.
Okay, but I think it was significantly below average in terms of how much of the labor was actually, done by females, and I think specifically because of what you were talking about. And I found that like really interesting because obviously it's a developing country, and within developing countries, I feel like a lot of the labor productivity is upheld by both genders. So I thought it was really interesting to note what you were talking about with the cultural aspects as well as the economic aspects that all contribute to this larger, taking girls out of education. And like throughout your interview, I think a lot of people sympathize with the idea of how much we truly take for granted.
Yes.
So yeah, I hated Zoom. Going to school is something that I sometimes dislike, but also like, we always take for granted, especially with your story about the menstrual cycle and everything. So that was definitely, something we have to understand.
Yeah, I think also, oh, sorry, go.
No, go ahead. Oh God. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, also an interesting thing that I was reading, that I was researching for my extended essay was actually this idea that a lot of women take part in the agricultural kind of labor workforce, but actually because India is still still a developing country, and this modernization within these big cities, it actually causes kind of this mass migration of the male workers to these bigger central cities. And the modernization of the agricultural workforce, especially like with, I don't know, the tractors, I don't really know what the modern aspects would be, but men often leave because this agricultural area has been modernized and can be basically done by machines and are not operated by a huge amount of people. But again, women are left alone. I think there's this mass migration of men to the cities to be working, and these women in underprivileged communities and villages are left there to take care of the children and the household chores. So it kind of, again, reinforces this whole idea that is their sole focus and goal, and like completely not emphasizing an importance of them earning an education or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. We also had a question earlier about how people can help from abroad. Nanhi Kali Foundation, just the overall, issue. What do you think?
You know what? It's really funny because my mom has been super focused on promoting her organization, and they actually created a YouTube channel. I will share you the name. She would love it, and I'm sure the workers there would love it if you guys could support it. And just honestly, it's very hard. There's no necessarily like donation area where you can really do that. I think just spreading awareness about it, because for me, it was something I wasn't aware of at all. Like before going to India, I was just like not colorblind, but blind to hardships experienced in education. I was completely shocked in learning about all of this. Like going to India was a complete culture shock for me. So learning about education and how girls sometimes aren't even able to maintain an education, and also just I took for granted this, again, like this idea of education and everything. So I think just spreading awareness about hardships experienced by them, and also just supporting organizations and educating yourselves on what they do is also huge. And I think just in general, girls, like I think in sports and in maybe not our school particularly, but in other schools, you just have to emphasize equality amongst us all. It's a very difficult topic to tackle, but in regards specifically to the organization, I will send links of their YouTube channel, and I will send links of their Instagram. They would love it if you guys could support them in that way, to help them, because especially right now it's very difficult with COVID and reaching out to all these girls. So far they've managed to ensure 300,000 girls get through an education, and that's all they've gotten right now, and they're progressing at a really fast rate, especially with the sports. So I think supporting them through that would be great, and just spreading awareness. I think that's the most important thing that I'm trying to do right now. So
yeah. Well, we would love to follow your Instagram account.
I will send you the link.
Thank you. What's really interesting, I think, about Indian culture is like that it's very distinct, and it's also deeply rooted within its country, And like obviously I can't really say much, but to the extent of my knowledge, which is mostly from the God of all things, thank you, Mr. Franz.
Yes.
It's like the caste system and everything, but I feel like, this whole idea of, valorizing men over women isn't something about caste, but it's more about this, throughout the entire culture of India.
Yeah.
So, like, I thought that was really interesting. And throughout your experience living in India for 2 years, I've never been to India, really want to go. But now that you look back at your time there, do you realize anything that truly valorized men over women? Just, simple things.
Like valorizing within India?
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know why this comes to mind. But in my school, at least, on the outdoor field that we had to be at a cricket field, and the women, there was this massive cement roller that they had to pull over the cricket pitching area, bowling area, where it had to be like flat, because I don't know if that interferes with the bowling of the ball. I don't know. But they had to roll it. These women had to pull this huge thing while man stood there and watched and directed it. And also, I lived on this agricultural area where women were the ones working and picking the vegetables or the plants. But men just stood around and watched. And I don't think it even mattered if the man had a big education or experience. He was just automatically assigned this position of leadership over these women who are working to financially support for their family. So that was a huge thing that I noticed, where it was just disproportionate in a sense of whether his level of education was higher or anything like that. He was automatically assigned this higher level of the superior level within the employment area. So I don't know why that immediately came to mind, but yeah, I think immediately I never really saw a woman in India be in a superior position outside where I was studying. I'm sure this is completely different in different cities. I'm not sure, but from what I had viewed and like observed, was a lot of men were put in these like higher superior positions. I don't know, in comparison to women. So that was something that was, yeah, kind of valorizing men over women for sure.
That's really interesting. So I guess this might be one of our last questions, unless people have questions, by the way. So go check that out. So going back to, the main topic of girls' education in India, what are your hopes in the future, as well as how do you think it would be possible in this, in this deeply rooted cultural sector?
I think the best thing, and what this organization is doing and progressing, is focusing on the young girl population, like girls and young kids in the age of like 4 to 10. Their minds are so they observe everything and they intake everything. So for girls at a young age to already be marginalized to this idea of household chores and like household responsibilities, and to be limited to that idea, that hugely impacts their future. But this organization truly aims to completely challenge that and completely eradicate this barrier of internalizing the idea of being less valorized and less important. And so they aim at, like I said, to help them gain an education from a really young age. So I think that is a huge thing in the progression of female education for the future, is starting young and focusing on this young girl population and teaching them through sports and through education that they are valorized and are just as equally important as the boys and males in their society. So I think starting young is a huge factor in the progression of female education, I think, for sure.
We have a question from Rachel. I can't 100% read it because it's so long, but okay. From experience, I know that some girls just aren't motivated to go to school, probably due to the deep-rooted cultural norms. So how is the foundation or other organization, I'm going to guess, trying to combat this?
I love that. Oh my God, I love that question. Okay, cultural norms. Again, this taboo of the period, like I said, is huge. So like I said, this organization is trying to provide these girls with dignity kits, and these kits that, like I said, have underwears, which surprisingly, again, I took for granted, because some girls don't have access always to clean underwears. They have pads, they have shoes, they have books, they have pencils, they have all the materials required for them to be going to school. And so I think, whenever you start a new school year, you want a new backpack or a new pencil case, and that kind of motivates you. Pencil case, and then books, and the underwear, and the pads and everything to allow them to go to school. So kind of challenging this cultural norm of limiting their provisions for specific requirements. So I think that was a huge thing. Also sports, like the cultural norm of women playing sports is non-existent in India. So the idea of encouraging these girls to start being physically active and to start playing these sports also psychologically empowers them to kind of defy these cultural norms of women being subservient and kind of staying within the house and belonging in the house and everything like that. So that was a really great question. Wow. But yeah, thank you, Rachel.
So Katrina, I don't know if you can answer this one, but I think you're seeing it on the comments. So is
yeah.
there a shift of men moving away from manual labor and moving towards service? I guess she's referring back to the, you know, the story of the girls pulling the something.
Yeah. Moving away from manual labor towards. So is that referring to like kind of like moving away from the agricultural manual labor area and towards the cities?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I was doing this for my EE where like literally because of modernization within the agricultural area, they don't require so many people in that labor workforce. Not as many as before. They obviously require a lot because it's a huge country, but not as much as before. So there is this shift towards like service industries and mass migration because they have limited job opportunities in this agricultural area. So totally there is this shift, and again it leaves women to focus in this agricultural area and at home. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I don't know, but definitely a shift with the India is a very developing, is still currently a developing country right now. So there's this huge mass modernization in the agricultural area again. So I think yes, definitely a shift with that for sure.
Perfect. If there is no other question, thank you so much for joining us today for our interview at Retail Revolution. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today for our interview.
Thank you for having me. Oh my God, this is awesome.
Of course.
Follow Retail Revolution.
Oh yeah, thank you. And please send us the Instagram account later.
Yeah, for sure.
So to our viewers, yes, thank you very much for joining us today. Both from the bottom of our hearts, Sarah and I really appreciate it for you guys to be being here today. So for our next event, Morgana will be publishing a panel where she will be talking to people including Ruby, Maria Leon, and Emily on the topic of education at young ages of the LGBTQ+ community and its benefits. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye. Bye.